Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. Celebrations and giving thanks are important. On Monday of this week, we had a celebration in our home, and on Thursday of this week, Jen and I went out to celebrate our 44th wedding anniversary. So the celebration on Monday reflected the fact that in Würzburg, Germany, our choir was hosted by this lovely couple and their family, and in this small village of 2,500 people, they welcomed us into all of their homes. They gave us a simple meal, which we thought was going to be the meal. They filled this little church and with well wishes and good spirit, and it was wonderful just singing to this full little church. And then to our surprise, they invited us back across the street for a wonderful banquet, and the choir and the church paid for all the food of this banquet. The mayor of the town was in the church that night. He paid for all the wine, and we certainly enjoyed that. And it was a wonderful evening, and we saw this wonderful garden the next day. And when we were in the wonderful garden, we said to our hosts, we said, well, you know, if you're ever in Vancouver, please come see us. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we'll be in Vancouver in August. So we had a wonderful evening on Monday, giving thanks and celebrating with our hosts and celebrating the wonderful choir tour and the connections musically that we made with people there. Today, I want to celebrate and give thanks to our church. In particular, I want to give thanks for this remarkable document that I discovered when I was looking. I thought it was important to say something about how we should relate to our Muslim neighbors, and I started looking, and there it is, 128 pages of detailed reflection that tells me more than I'll be able to convey to you and more than I can absorb about what we should do. And I think we're very fortunate to belong to a church that has that kind of resources available to us in the difficult times in which we live. I also want to give thanks to the saints amongst us. Today's the day when Pope Francis invited 1,500 homeless people amongst the 100,000 ticket holders to participate in the canonization of Mother Teresa. And they not only attended, but they were fed by the members of the order that Mother Teresa had founded. So just as the Pope celebrated that saint, I celebrate you, our saints. Those of you who were here a few weeks ago will have a head start over those of you who weren't, because Debbie Blue gave this wonderful sermon about the story of Hagar, entitled The Other Woman. And she covered the whole story, and then on Tuesday she invited everyone to an attendance of about her book about the other woman, which is about not only Hagar, but interestingly Esther and interestingly Mary, which is not somebody we spend a lot of time talking about in most Protestant churches. Our church could be an exception given our choir choices from time to time. Today my focus is on Genesis 16 and Ishmael. And Ishmael is the founder of the Arab lineage, and therefore of the whole Muslim tradition. And so it's this encounter with Ishmael that's my focus this morning. Fear and hate are powerful emotions. Our choir was in Strasbourg, France on Bastille Day, and after we watched the fireworks from the safety of our hotel balcony, and as I was going to bed, I did a last email back to my sons in Vancouver, and my son Cliff said, "Oh, thanks, Dad, and take care because of what just happened in Nice." And of course, I had no idea what had just happened in Nice, and really, I didn't really find out the details about it until I came back, because surprisingly, perhaps, but the news coverage here was more detailed than I was able to absorb in Strasbourg, France, and so the horrors of that event came to me by our son from here. The day after we left Würzburg, a deranged teen was killed when he was trying to inflict harm and maim passengers on a train. In this week's Globe, we have a story about the fear factor and former President Sarkozy in France. In the context of frightening events and those who react by promoting fear and hate, it is wonderful to have the United Church of Canada as a resource on how we should treat our Muslim neighbors. The scriptural context is God's repeated promises to Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation. As that we may know puts it, in the Genesis record we have two lineages that descend, one through Isaac to Jerusalem and Jesus, and one through Ishmael leading to Mecca and Muhammad. As Muslim leaders and clerics reminded 27 Christians leaders in 2009, this common lineage also includes a common word. And the common word is about loving God and loving neighbors. Genesis 16 starts with the unfortunate fact that notwithstanding God's promises, Abram and his wife Sarai have no children. As we heard from Debbie Blue, Sarai, in accordance with Hebrew law of the day, proposes an ingenious solution: surrogate parenting with Hagar, her Egyptian slave girl. Not for the last time, there's a falling out. Hagar flees to the wilderness. She sees God, who promises her a son named Ishmael, meaning God hears. The chapter ends with the birth of Ishmael to Abram, age 86. The text is a difficult one, as Bill Sexsmith was pointing out to me at the outset of the service this morning, and it's not found in any common lectionary, as I've already told you, so it's a difficult one to explore. And when we look at it, there's a number of uncomfortable things that it tells us. So we've got a slave girl, which makes us uncomfortable, and she's an Egyptian slave girl, and she gave the Egyptian to him as a wife. The repeated references to Egypt have significant to us as parallels to later stories about Joseph and Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. The legal context is that it was not unknown to Hebrew law to use slaves as surrogate mothers. On the other hand, it may be surprising to us that he took her as a wife, but polygamy is common in the Old Testament. Perhaps less surprising is that the Revised Standard Version says that Hagar then treated Sarai with contempt, or as the Message says, she looked down on Sarai. Nor is it surprising that Sarai's reaction is to deal harshly with Hagar. In the contemporary Bible, the Message's words are to be abusive to her. In that, therefore, it's not surprising that Hagar runs away. What is surprising is the encounter between Hagar and God, which is central to the chapter. The angel of God finds her by a spring in the desert wilderness. The first surprise is that he tells this abused slave girl to return to her mistress and submit to her. As the Message says, put up with her abuse. And this sends off warning bells to us in our age, where we're used to dealing in a court context with abused women and the troubles that surround that. This troubling advice is followed by an even more surprising promise that her offspring shall be multiplied into multitudes. As one commentary puts it, Hagar is otherwise vindicated. The angel of the Lord is then quoted as telling her that God has paid heed to your affliction. So God is answering Hagar and paying heed to her affliction, and maybe that's his promise that if she returns, she will not be treated in an abusive way. What he does tell us is that God As the Message puts it, God heard you, God answered you. God hears is the meaning of Ishmael. Amongst other things in the biblical scripture, we are uncomfortable with the promise that he shall be a wild ass of a man, and that everyone's hand will be against him. The word ass offends modern ears. Interestingly, the King James Version says that Ishmael shall be a wild man. So they drop the word ass altogether. One commentary points out that in a biblical context, they're not listening with modern ears, and the term a wild ass is probably a pretty powerful animal. So in the biblical context, where it's a compliment for a leader to be described as a viper or a ravenous wolf, to be called a wild ass might have been, to their ears, a good thing. Again, the Message puts it more directly, especially to someone raised in Calgary, the home of the Stampede. He'll be a bucking bronco of a man, a real fighter. So that's an image that is consistent with a powerful descendant who will found a great nation. The encounter ends with Hagar commenting that she has seen God. As we know, Moses only saw the burning bush, so this is again remarkable in biblical terms. So chapter 16 is a step along a journey. We can celebrate that God sees and hears us and heeds our affliction. We can marvel that the book of Genesis can combine elements of fundamental philosophy, creation, and the covenant, with gripping human interest stories. Less optimistically, we can wonder at the treatment of the other, the Egyptian. This disquiet isn't lessened as the story continues. As Debbie Blue told us, having a child at age 86 isn't good enough. In chapter 21, Sarai bears a son, Isaac. Hagar and Ishmael, age 13, are sent away, and God makes a further promise to Abraham and Sarah of the promised land to the chosen people. This covenant is central to the Jewish and Christian traditions. As Debbie Blue asked, why is the story of Hagar, hence Ishmael, even here? It seems like a bit of a sidebar to our faith tradition, but the Ishmael story is here. It's part of the Genesis, even if it isn't part of most lectionaries. So far as we know, Ishmael spent 13 happy years with Abram and Sarai, and he did go on to found one of two great lineages of Abraham, as God promised Hagar. And even in our faith story, our faith tradition, the story of Ishmael does not quite end with chapter 16. As that we may know points out, Abraham intercedes for Ishmael with God. So it's significant that Abraham manned up and spoke up for his son Ishmael. And God again promises that he shall be a great nation. The Bible tells us about Ishmael's 12 tribes. The Bible tells us that Ishmael is circumcised with Abraham, therefore is part of the first covenant that God makes with Abraham before Isaac's birth. And Ishmael, who dies aged 137, is present when Abraham is buried aged 175. So he is present with Isaac at the death and burial of his father. So there is a more to the story than chapter 16 in Genesis, but in our faith tradition, all this pales as the Genesis story goes on to tell the story of the covenant with the chosen people and the promised land. In the Muslim faith tradition, however, Ishmael with Abraham goes on to play a central role in the founding of what becomes Mecca. He's listed with Abraham and Jacob as a founding prophet. And as we know, Jesus too is honored as a prophet. So it is true, as that we may know each other puts it, that there is a common heritage. However, it's also true, as John Levinson, Harvard Divinity School author of Abraham, puts it, that we may ask whether there is one Abraham or three. There are differences in the three faith traditions, and as one commentator says, one of the differences is each faith tradition purports to have superiority over the other, which is not really the best way to get to a position of respectful dialogue, but that's what the three faith traditions are doing. That We Are One is a great document because it doesn't gloss over the differences, but deals with the hard questions and encourages further study and dialogue. And as Debbie Blue put it on Tuesday evening, it's through dialogue, and her view is by working at these theological questions together is the way that we will develop a common position to go forward theologically. While there are differences as well as similarities in the great traditions, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs reminded us this year that both the Jewish and Christian communities are deeply indebted to the thinkers of Islam. Moorish Spain had several centuries where civilizations flourished together. This resulted not only in the glorious architecture of Cordoba and Granada, but also the great Islamic thinkers who recovered the classical tradition of philosophy, leading the West and the Christian Church out of the Dark Ages. Muslims, Christians, and Jews worked together. It can be done. And Rabbi Sachs challenged the leaders of each faith to tell their followers that those who hate in the name of God are not following the way of Abraham. The murder of the innocent is a sin as well as a crime, and terror in the name of God is a desecration in the name of God. Last week, King Mohammed VI of Morocco, the highest Muslim authority in his nation, gave a historic speech, saying these same things to his people and expressly addressing the millions of Moroccans living in Europe. At her Tuesday evening presentation on The Other Woman, Debbie Blue called on us to engage in discussion with our Muslim neighbors. A trending story in today's New York Times, 535 comments as of 6:30 this morning, is a column entitled, "What Religion Would Jesus Belong To?" It is by someone who is, quote, not particularly religious, unquote, who nonetheless sees religious faith as one of the most important forces for good or ill. And so we're familiar with the commentators about religion as a force for ill. My message is we should celebrate religion and our church as a force for good. The commentator in the New York Times is inspired by those who work with the other, the poor and the homeless. And of course, Mother Teresa did exactly that. I recognize she's a controversial figure, but she worked tirelessly for the other, the poor and the homeless. And what was her attitude towards Muslims and Hindus, of course? And the answer is, it wasn't her job to convert them. She was dealing with them as people. And in her words, her job was to make them the best Muslims or Hindus that they could be. So that's her model, and I celebrate that, and I celebrate the saints in our church who are working to achieve similar things right here. I celebrate the United Church of Canada, which in the aftermath of 9/11 didn't think about waging war with Iraq, but instead did the detailed work to pursue a dialogue with Muslims, the other. As the extract printed in your bulletin says, we believe that the prediction of the Quran that Christians and Muslims can be the nearest amongst them in love is possible and preferable as to an alternative path of increasing tension, mistrust, and violence. Rather than fear, we affirm that ours, like Islam, is a religion of peace, mercy, justice, and compassion. We commit to a journey towards reconciliation, understanding, and cooperation with our Muslim neighbors. And there's a key part of the statement in 2006, adopting the 128-page document in your bulletin. So I commend that to you, and I'm proud of the United Church of Canada. And we have a lot to be proud of in our own congregation. I'm proud of our outreach team members who are helping us to do all that we can do to help our refugee family, and also to help a second refugee and her family. I'm proud to be part of a choir that brings the joy and meaning of sacred music here and connects with people far away. I'm proud of our emerging. I asked Jan to tell me if I was speaking too quickly, but I didn't expect her to be sending the alarm when I spoke too long. She says she's innocent. We're almost done, folks. Hang in there. I am proud of our emerging work with our Musqueam neighbors and of the fact of our continued presence in Hazelton, working directly with First Nations people. And I'm proud of the leadership of our acting lead minister, Pamela, who engages us in many ways to be the best congregation that we can be. In her prayer for a time of violence this summer, our moderator called on us to wrestle with how to respond to the devastation, death, fear, and hatred around us with compassionate and prophetic love. How to respond with compassionate and prophetic love. She called on us to listen carefully to hear the changes we need to make in our own lives and institutions so we might include rather than exclude. Today, we give thanks and celebrate our church as amongst the peacemakers and bridge builders and those who fight hatred and fear with love and understanding. May it be so.